It was one of the biggest stories of the year, and one that had the public clinging to every update. But what was it like behind the scenes, covering Ana Walshe's disappearance and Brian Walshe's arrest? Welcome back to the Searches for Ana Walshe. I'm your host, Colton Bradford. So far in our series, we've walked you through what we know about Ana Walshe's disappearance and the murder allegations against her husband, Brian Walshe. There were so many twists and turns in this case, especially in the weeks after Ana's disappearance on New Year's Day in 2023.
All right, let's get to breaking news right now. The husband of a missing Cohasset woman just faced a judge.
And here at NBC10 Boston, it was all hands on deck in our newsroom. Eventually, when the case morphed from missing person to murder. Our reporters and photographers, they crisscrossed the Boston area to keep up with the developments. Producer Matt Fortin sat down with 3 NBC10 Boston journalists to hear their accounts of covering the search for Ana Walshe.
The 3 people we're going to hear from are Abby Nisgoda, one of our general assignment reporters, Kathy Curran, our chief investigative strategist, and staff photographer Mark Garfinkel. Abby covered this case day in and day out for about a month as it was first developing last year, and she'll take us through the chaotic first few days of the search, including the mysterious fire at the Walshes' former home. She also spoke to people who were in the Walshes' circle, who revealed startling new details, and covered the shocking allegations that prosecutors brought against Brian in a case that she says still keeps her up at night. Kathy is one of the best sourced journalists in Boston, and she tells us about using her extensive network to get exclusive information on the unfolding search for Ana. Kathy also sifted through court documents and found troubling signs that something might have been wrong. She'll touch on why she felt early on that Ana was in danger. The last person we'll hear from is Mark, the legendary news photographer behind the infamous shots of Brian appearing to smile as he walked out of the Cohasset police station on his way to court after being first charged in the case. These shots of Brian shocked people on social media who questioned how someone could be smiling when their wife and mother of their children was missing. Mark will also tell us about the bizarre personal connection that he had to the case, which steered us right into a critical piece of the search. Before we get into all that, though, a reminder, Brian Walshe has pleaded not guilty in the Walshe case, and we just learned from his new lawyer that he doesn't want to speak to us on this podcast, at least not right now. All right, here are my conversations with Abby, Kathy, and Mark.
Tell me about when this story first came on your radar.
I don't even think it was the story that I was first assigned to of the day. I think I was out on something else entirely when all of the sudden we got a news release or something of that matter from the Cohasset Police Department saying they were holding a press conference because this woman had gone missing. We had maybe heard that she'd gone missing, but we don't cover every missing person's case here. So does it rise to the level of like a newsworthy story? We didn't know at that point. All of a sudden there's a press conference. Bam. We've got to go. We show up and they say that this woman has been missing for a couple of days. Okay, why didn't you tell us about it earlier? Well, now we're starting to think that she might be in danger, but we're not sure. We know that she was supposed to take a ride share to the airport. We know she didn't get on the flight, but we don't know if she ever took a ride share. So now it becomes like, is she in danger or is she not? The police chief even said, well, maybe she just needed a break from her life, a break from her kids. It was very clear to me on that first original press conference that they had no idea where she was, if she was in danger. It didn't seem to me that they thought she was dead or that she was murdered, but it was like, we need to put this out there so we can get some answers. So I'm putting together my story. I'm in the car. Oh, all of a sudden I get a call from the desk. They're searching the woods behind this grocery store in Cohasset. Go there. There are dogs, there are state police. Okay, is she in the woods? Is her body in the woods? They didn't say that, so I'm texting the police chief, is there a body in the woods here? What's going on? Then all of a sudden, I get this wild call from our assignment desk saying, there's a house on fire in Cohasset. Okay, do we need to check out a fire? No, it's the same house that the Walshes just sold a couple of months ago. So we rushed to the house fire, and it's like minutes to air. I have no idea if this is connected. The fire chief isn't saying. Neighbors are like, how is this just a coincidence? There's a huge fire. And even to this day, they've never been able to prove that that has anything to do with this case. So here I am, the reporter saying, here's what we know. A woman is missing. We don't know where she is. Here's a search happening. Her previous home is on fire and burning. We don't know if it's connected. And by the way, her husband and children are at the house. Nobody's saying that they're implicated in this. But there you go. And then from there, it just became like an onion, layer by layer. It started to unravel and the pieces started to come together that like, okay, we've got a murder on our hands. And then started the massive investigation and the unraveling of their lives and, the Walshes and their history and what may have happened in the days leading up to Ana's disappearance and ultimately her death.
So still sticking to that, we'll stick to that Friday night, Saturday morning period where there was this random house fire. They're not saying that she was killed yet. This is before Brian was charged with anything. They were still saying that he was cooperating. There was obviously so much space for speculation as to what's going on because there were so many missing pieces. Tell me a little bit about what the public was saying and thinking during that time, because I just remember seeing so much on social media of just people with these crazy ideas on what was going on. And I mean, there was so much public interest in this right from the get-go.
It was wild. It was to the point where we even had a reporter do a story on the TikTok detectives that took such interest in what became like one of those true crime stories. I have no idea why this story got all of that traction. I do have a couple of ideas. You've got a beautiful woman who lives in this house with this family. She also worked in DC. She's from Serbia. There was just a lot of places that were interested in this. So I think that helped lead to the traction. But the public, of course, the first day everyone thought it was the husband. The first day everyone thought it was the husband. Police would only say he's cooperating with the investigation. It had been a couple of days. We took their word for it. But at that house fire, every single person in that neighborhood was like, it's gotta be connected. This can't be a coincidence. And that's something that still bothers me to this day. That fire, who said it, what, I think the cause ultimately, they never said that it was suspicious, but the timing of it is, as a reporter, that makes the alarm in my head go off. And this is one of those cases that still keeps me up at night.
Over that weekend, the search continued. They were on ATVs, they were underwater, they were all over the place in Cohasset trying to find her. Sunday rolls around. Brian is charged with misleading investigators. What was Monday like?
It felt like the house of cards was starting to fall. Because in those days of the search, we had never heard from him, which I thought was weird. Yes, he was cooperating, but so often in missing persons cases, you hear that emotional plea from the family. I would think that her husband would be first out, help me find my wife, where is Ana? And we never heard from him, which I thought was weird. We would see him outside of his house milling about because we went to the house where they lived, but he never spoke to us. And everyone, processes in different ways, but there wasn't that outcry, which immediately to me felt weird. Also, all of her family is in Serbia. So getting in touch with them, we ultimately were able to, but it was difficult. There wasn't that outcry from them. The only person we were able to get in touch with in the original first days was her best friend in DC, which we did a couple of interviews with, and that plea was coming from him. But it was like, if your wife, the mother of your children, has been missing for several days and you're not saying anything, that was suspicious. So
you would see him outside of the house and he was like pacing around?
We would see him outside of the house, but he never once came up to our cameras and spoke. So when he was ultimately charged, that was really insane for us as field crews to be like, we were just this close from someone who ultimately gets charged with this murder. So it felt like the chips were starting to fall when he was charged with misleading police, because all of the sudden we're hearing he purchased cleaning supplies at a location. Those supplies were then found in a dumpster, and okay, there's blood, there's a hacksaw. Is it her blood? It was very clear that they didn't have enough yet to charge him with murder, but all signs were pointing to that. And it became this massive search, like you were mentioning, not just in the woods with the ATVs, but from the South Shore to the North Shore, because Brian Walshe had driven to his mother's home, and the thought is that he discarded some things in her dumpster, which went to a different location, and ultimately a lot of this stuff was destroyed before investigators were able to get to it. So that is something that still haunts me to this day, that they never found her body. It's just they found enough that they know that she was murdered, blood, etc. But I mean, Ana Walshe, her body was destroyed, incinerated, before investigators were ever able to get to it. And I remember one of the weirdest things was when we were talking to, crime scene investigators. They said, with the garbage, because a lot of this, right, was in dumpsters. He allegedly discarded it in dumpsters all over the state, his mom's, etc. So they're going through these trash plants, and the crime scene investigators say, it's really good that it was cold, because this was January, because it was cold, a lot of the evidence was preserved. So if it was wet, if it was hot, if it was, melting, but I mean, when they found this stuff, it was still in really good condition for testing. So yeah, and then we started talking to people in their lives. We were able to get in touch with the people who lived in an apartment that Brian and Ana owned, because they owned some property and they were renting it to some tenants. And one of those tenants reached out to me and said, this was around the same time when Brian starts getting charged with misleading police. I get a Facebook message saying,
they reached out to you.
They reached out to me, a woman named Mandy, and she said, I rent an apartment from the Walshes, and I can tell you there were signs that things were going south in that relationship, because she says that Ana and Brian sold the apartment days before the new year and were trying to get rid of assets. Now we know that Brian Walshe is ultimately bankrupt. He was just assigned a public defender because he cannot even afford a lawyer. But this perfect relationship of this family living in this beautiful home in Cohasset and doing so well, all of a sudden in the days before, they're racing to get rid of assets, including an apartment. Ana, she said, seemed upset. That was the first interview I did where someone said, things are not as it seems. And Brian was even texting with these tenants after the murder, because they said Happy New Year, and he said, Happy New Year, I just found my phone. Sorry, I've been crazed, I've been busy murdering your wife. So that was really chilling.
Did you cover this were you on this every day, basically?
For about a month.
For about a month.
For about a month, every day. We started getting in touch with journalists in Serbia, because it was front page news in Serbia. And I was desperately trying to get in touch with Ana's mother, who doesn't speak English at all. So I knew I was going to have to get a translator, and it was really, really difficult. So I ended up speaking through a Serbian journalist who interviewed the mother. And that was wild as well, because the mother had said Ana desperately wanted her to come for Christmas. And she didn't say why, and she didn't say that she was having trouble in her marriage, but it was this last-minute plea and the mother was not able to make it. And now I'm sure every day in her mind she's wishing that she did, if she could have stopped something. Because you don't make a last minute request for someone to come all the way from Serbia if something isn't wrong.
You talked to her mom, you talked to these tenants, you talked to, so many people on your travels throughout the time. What interview do you think was the most personally for you, just kind of jaw-dropping and like, oh my God, like this person is telling me this right now?
I would say the tenants, definitely, because they knew these people very well. They weren't just like landlord situation, they were friends. This guy was a contractor and did work on the apartment, work on other properties for Brian. Like, they were tight. And they were the only ones I talked to who had talked to Brian after the alleged murder. And definitely seemed like they noticed the couple was fighting. They noticed getting rid of assets. They noticed things were amiss. When I spoke with her family in Serbia, they were so far away that besides that request to come for Christmas that her mom received, no one had any idea that anything was wrong. One of the more jaw-dropping interviews was just talking to her cousin. So the cousin was the only one we were able to get in touch with personally, where I was speaking with the cousin over the phone. Her cousin spoke English, and they'd met Brian several times, said he was lovely. Denial that he had anything to do with this is what we kept getting from Ana's family, which was just interesting. I would think if somebody in my family was murdered and their husband was implicated, I don't know if I would defend the husband as much as they were. They were really, really in shock that he'd ever be accused, and the mom was basically saying, it can't be Brian, it can't be. And it turns out that maybe it is.
What was your personal processing like of watching this unfold? Because I know a lot of people at home struggled and were upset by it. Was this a particularly hard one for you you did this every day for a month. I mean, was that hard for you to process? How did you detach from that when you went home for the day? What was that like?
I think as reporters, we get really good at compartmentalizing what we cover and then putting it in a box when we go home and then coming back and then opening it up the next day and then putting it in a box. This was really difficult because I did this for a month and then I did Lindsay Clancy for a couple of weeks right after, and that's the woman who was charged with killing her children and then ultimately trying to kill herself in Duxbury. So it was back to back. I know that this podcast isn't about that case, but it felt like, how tragic can the news cycle be in the beginning of the year? I mean, this was New Year's Day, and here we are, tragedy. So I think the hardest part for me is this was a mom. And to this day, I still don't know how her kids are doing. I assume they are with her sister, never was able to get in touch with her sister. And knowing that those kids are gonna grow up one day to learn that their mother's body was likely incinerated, I can't imagine that. And I don't know if they'll ever get the true answer as to what happened. Why was there blood in the basement? What did he mean to? I think it's a lot about intent. A lot of the public reaction online was like, was this an accident? He pushed her and all of a sudden she's dead and he freaks out. And what do you do? Or was this a marriage that was ending, finances that were not good anymore, and there was even rumors of an affair in D.C. because she worked in D.C. I mean, was there anger and rage, or was this an accident? And I don't know if we'll ever figure that out. Maybe in the trial, maybe if there's an admission. But they have this fun New Year's Eve party as in just them and Jem, the guy she worked for in the real estate industry. He leaves and then she dies. So how do you go from a fun New Year's Eve to her being dead? I don't get it. There was even like a wine bottle in their home where Ana had written like, here's to the best year of our lives, We never ended up airing that because we felt like it was an invasion of privacy. You could see it through a window, but it was a really gray area. But she was writing as if this was the beginning of an amazing new year. And then she's dead. So it was like the last words. I don't know who that letter was to. It was written on the side of a champagne bottle for New Year's Eve. I don't know if that was to Brian or if it was to her colleague who was there at the party. But to me, it shows that this woman had no idea what was coming.
Do you think that like part of the appeal to this story is just the fact that it is this upper middle class, perhaps wealthy, white family on the South Shore, that it does seem like they had everything together?
I mean, it was a Dateline episode in the making from the onset, and we even had conversations in the newsroom about why are we giving so much attention to this case. We talked about race. You know, we talked about if this was a woman of color, would it be getting the same national attention? I mean, these are the conversations we had to have. Yes, a lot of people suffer from domestic violence. Yes, a lot of people go missing. I don't know how many people are murdered so brutally and then thrown away in dumpsters and ultimately incinerated. And I think that adds to the level of, oh my God, we've got one of the, whoever did this is a certified killer. And I think the facade, definitely. And speaking of her family, even in those days when she was missing, I spoke with friends and they said, yes, the police are like, maybe she needs a break, but Ana would never go that long without talking to her kids. So why did we go so long without hearing from police, without starting to think that this was a criminal case here? I don't know, but they knew. The friends knew immediately that this wasn't right. And then you have that police report from DC that came out ultimately that she said, Brian was threatening to kill her.
That was from years ago.
That was from years ago, but it all of a sudden came out. And like so many domestic violence cases, it didn't go forward because Ana ultimately refused to cooperate with prosecutors. And that is a story we cover often about these women who are in abusive relationships. They file something, but then, for whatever reason, they become too scared to go forward, and then they're right back in that relationship. So, you have this woman online who's posting inspirational quotes, and then it's Instagram versus reality.
Last thought is just, what are you expecting from this trial?
I mean, I would optimistically answers. I would love answers to come out of that trial. A lot of them, the defendant never speaks. The Commonwealth and prosecution have to do their best to prove with all of the physical and digital evidence and put the pieces together and then give their story of what happened. I'd be shocked if Brian Walshe took the stand. It'll be interesting to see what his defense is, because so far we haven't heard much. There's no insanity plea or anything of that nature. And he just changed lawyers because of his finances. So will there even be a fight? But I know all of Cohasset will be watching, and so will we.
So when there's a big story, you get a lot of exclusive scoops and things like that, but when there's a big story that reporters and news outlets are chasing all at once, tell me the difference in the approach that you take as someone on the investigative side versus a general assignment reporter.
So basically, we want to pitch in, right, to try to help in any way that we can. And just because of my experience, I have a lot of sources in law enforcement. And I can't stress how important that is. It really, allows you to get information that other journalists can't get just because of the trust you've built, especially with members of law enforcement. We also try to think differently. We think, okay, what records could be out there? We dig through all the different courts to see if we can find information on people. We dig through social media, and we just try to come up with nuggets to set us apart, to get exclusive information and important information that the public should know or want to know.
So let's go back to January 2023. What were your first thoughts flashing through your head when we get that news release into the newsroom? Missing person, Ana Walshe, Cohasset, Massachusetts, hasn't been seen since New Year's Day. What are you thinking? We get a lot of missing people in.
Right. So, when you hear someone's missing, there are so many thoughts, right? It's like, is that person in danger? Is that person suffering from some sort of mental health episode? Did something bad happen? Did that person leave? When you think of Cohasset, you don't think of a violent crime because there isn't a lot of violent crime in Cohasset. I grew up here. I've been to Cohasset a lot, spent a lot of time there, and it's not a community where you think of anything violent happening. But when you hear of a mother of three who just goes missing, my gut told me something's wrong, because I don't think, being a parent, I don't think a mom would just leave and leave her kids behind. So from the outside, I just started, checking in every now and then, what's going on with this Ana Walshe case? Are you hearing anything? And then a couple of days into it, just from my sources, I learned that they were thinking that there was something suspicious. And then, as time went on, my sources were saying, they're starting to look at the husband. So when we started looking into Brian Walshe's background, we found that federal case, and where he was convicted of selling the fake Warhol paintings online. And in those filings, there was a lot of interesting information just about his background, about Ana, about their relationship. And there were letters that Ana had written, and she had said that, when they first met back in 2008, I believe it was love at first sight. She also described him as a loving father. But she said that he had a troubling childhood, and she claimed that, he learned how to cheat and lie. I don't know if those were the exact words, but it definitely painted a little bit of a troubling side of him. She also said that he was trying to overcome his past and to get on the right path and do the right thing. So we learned a little bit about Brian in those filings. Then down in probate court, there was a whole other side of Brian Walshe. There wasn't talk of a loving father. There was talk of a struggle over money with his dad. His cousin and a friend of his father's had described Brian as a sociopath, as someone who could be violent. They said that his father had basically cut him off. And so you start to think, okay, well, this is painting a different picture of Brian Walshe than, the one that Ana described, right? A sociopath, somebody who was violent and not so much the loving father. So you wonder, when you have the conviction and the fraud, and then you have him being cut off from his father's estate, you wonder, what happened, And the other thing, in the federal court filings, I remember that it said that Ana was living down in D.C. For her job part-time, and it said that she had abandoned the children. So you're wondering what's happening with that family dynamic. Did something go wrong with money? Was there something in the art fraud case that she was involved in? And your mind goes in all different places. And you're just wondering, it seems like this isn't just a regular missing person case that, or she decided to leave. It sounds like to me in my gut that there's something more going on there.
So when did you first learn, I believe it was a Sunday, when he was arrested? There was a press conference on Friday about the police were looking for Ana. At that point, police were saying that he was cooperating with them, and Brian, I mean. Just 2 days later, he was being arrested for allegedly misleading investigators. What did you know at that point? Because he hadn't been charged with her murder yet, but I think that's where a lot of us were thinking was coming next.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't remember the timing of everything, but my sources were telling me that something has gone wrong and that they believe that she had been harmed and that he was a possible suspect. And, then just staying in touch and as things developed, then my sources told me about this troubling internet search that they found on his devices that were related to murder, where there were allegedly searches about dismembering a body, about how to dispose a body. And so these were longtime sources, high-level sources, and that's when, it just hits you that, oh my God, she's possibly not alive at this point. And I feel like there's always that fear, right? I mean, somebody's missing for so long. And then when we just began hearing more information and as the case developed, it was just awful, a mom of 3, gone.
As that information about the online searches was coming to light, all the meanwhile, there were huge physical searches across the eastern part of the state. Talk to me about following those physical searches and what you were learning throughout the week about what was being uncovered.
Sure. So, as the investigation progressed, investigators were developing information that, something awful happened. But where was Ana? If she was dead, where was her body? There were searches everywhere, right? They were trying to piece together where Brian Walshe had been and if he left any trail of evidence behind. And, my sources eventually learned there was the search at a trash facility. And that's when my sources said there were items that were possibly used in a very violent crime that were discovered there. And they told me that there was a hacksaw. There were towels with blood on them. There were some items that were possibly connected to Ana that were found at that facility. And then that there were also some items that appeared to be the same items that Brian Walshe had purchased at a Home Depot before this case ever came to light.
We don't exactly know when the trial is going to happen. What do you expect from a trial like this where there's so much public interest and there's so much that we still don't know?
Well, I think what's going to be interesting, and we already know part of it, right, is just the timeline and the lengths that Brian Walshe allegedly took to kill his wife and to try to get away with it. And just the methods that investigators took to put it all together, I think will be really interesting. So, we're going to hear a lot of scientific evidence. We're going to hear a lot about DNA, and purchases and surveillance video and just mapping out his movements leading up to the murder and then the aftermath of it.
You cover all kinds of stories in the Boston area, but I want you to tell me what you remember about covering the Brian Walshe case, the search for Ana Walshe, and
the first sights and scenes that you covered in that case last year?
Well, I remember I was on my off day, and I remember hearing or seeing the story on our newscast, and I was, I thought right away, this is, going to be something when I get back into work the next day. And, I remember thinking, personally, I'm thinking, oh, wow, I wonder what happened to the lady, what happened, it didn't seem too good, So I got into work, and my desk here at NBC10 Boston sent me to Cohasset, where he was inside the Cohasset local jail, and he was going to be moved to court to be processed and arraigned. And I was one of the only photographers there, and they took him out, and he just looked right at my camera, and he gave a big smile, and which is, kind of, wow, what's up with that? And I was just very surprised, and I took his photograph and some video, and they brought him into the police car, and they drove him to court. And I then went to be stationed outside of his house with other press, and where the investigation was being conducted with a lot of Massachusetts State Police and Cohasset Police. And I was listening from my car to the arraignment on my cell phone, and I was surprised that they had said that there was a Swampscott connection. I grew up in Swampscott, and my mother still lives in Swampscott. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I kept being more intrigued, and all of a sudden, maybe 3 hours later, my mother called, and she called me and she said, Mark, there are a lot of undercover police that they're looking at the dumpster that we use at my place. I said, really, Mom? So I told our desk, and we had a helicopter over that in a few minutes, and we had an exclusive that they were searching her dumpster for, unfortunately, remains or a weapon, which I believe that they did get a weapon out of there. I may be mistaken. They did get some significant evidence. What's really, really freaky is that I had probably once a week, when I go visit my mother with my 6-year-old on Saturdays, I will take out her trash, and I have opened that dumpster, and I opened that dumpster literally a day or two after he is suspected of depositing stuff into that dumpster. So it was kind of a weird circle for me. It's interesting, kind of weird stuff,
Coming up next on the searches for Ana Walshe, we'll be diving into the life of the woman whose disappearance and alleged murder is at the center of all of this intrigue. Who was Ana? This is what one friend had to say about her.
An absolute light. Well, the kind of person, when you walk into a room, you feel her energy.
An absolute light. But we'll walk through possible signs that something was wrong much earlier than her disappearance in our next episode. If you want to follow the Walshe case with us, subscribe to the show wherever you get podcasts and leave us a review to help others find the show too. This episode was produced by Matt Fortin and Julia Yohe, executive produced by Asher Klein and Mark Fortier. I'm Colton Bradford.